Hello, my name is Kidest Gebre. I'm a junior majoring in Geography and the Environment and minoring in WGSS and VMAP. This past summer, I had the pleasure of working with Virginia Interfaith Power and Light as Kendall Crawford being my supervisor and Dr. Finley Brooke as my mentor. And I want to start this, I was here for all the other presentations and they were very formal, and I would like to start this by introducing myself because I worked a lot on grassroots organizing and community organizing, and that's basically based on who you are and immersing yourself within the community and exposing yourself to the community so that they can have full trust and full gain of who you are, and and try to develop that relationship with the community. So I'm going to start with that with you guys. I wasn't involved with environmental justice until my senior year of high school, and I never thought about environmental justice as a social issue to study until then. My experience with food shortages during my senior year of high school, and the fact that my high school specifically had to deal with that issue in Washington, D.C. was a huge eye-opening moment for me, and it expanded my horizon of social issues to involve the environment as well. So as an immigrant from Ethiopia, I was exposed to the dangers of climate change. Early on, I was very familiar with droughts, and I already knew food shortages as being, a regular occurrence in my country, but I never thought about climate change as the big culprit. So after moving to DC, my community of Black immigrants and poor people of color was also exposed to the dangers of gentrification and the environmental hazards that come with living in a city that's always changing. However, I never thought to connect my two experiences. I know now that it's no coincidence that poor people of color in the US, as well as globally, are the ones that suffer the most from the consequences of climate change. This has motivated me to join the movement for climate action and specifically focus on environmental justice to oppose the repression and exploitation of lands, peoples, and cultures and other life forms across our globe. That's also one of the fundamental principles of environmental justice, which is why I wanted to work with Virginia Interfaith Power and Light this past summer, because they focus on environmental justice as one of their core values. And another core value of them is that they have is interfaith advocacy. It's within the name, but they try to get to mobilize multiple faith groups and multiple congregations across Virginia to fight for environmental justice. And they also, with that, they try to create sustainable communities with environmental justice and the focus on environmental racism as its core. So what is environmental justice? Well, environmental justice refers to environmental policies, practices, or directives that differentially affect or disadvantage, whether intentionally or unintentionally, individual groups or communities based on race and color. This is also reinforced by governmental, legal, economic, and political and military institutions. And environmental racism combined with public policies and industry practices to provide benefits for countries, but not for the people. So the environmental justice movement fights racial and class discrimination in the environmental policy making, the selective enforcement of environmental laws, and the targeting of communities of color and poor communities for environmentally disaster land uses such as toxic waste disposal sites and pipelines. Communities of color and poor communities of color specifically bear an unequal and unfair number of environmental destructive land uses that take from the community but not give back to it. The environmental justice movement also seeks to end environmental and economic injustices by eliminating locations of environmentally toxic facilities anywhere in the world. It's not just we take it from one poor community and place it in another. It's just the ending of building any more toxic facilities in our globe. So working with Virginia Interfaith Power and Light, it's a state of Virginia Interfaith Power and Light. It's a long name, so I'm just going to say VIPL. VIPL is the state affiliate of a national organization. It is the national organization goes by Interfaith Power and Light. It is dedicated to bringing all faith communities to mobilize a religious response to climate change through energy conservation, energy efficiency, and renewable energy. It works across Virginia, phases communities to mobilize a morally centered response to climate crisis. A lot of times, one of the biggest things I've learned over the summer is a lot of times people don't tend to connect to the environment because we always impose our will on the environment rather than work within the environment. It's always, oh, what can you do to the environment rather than what can you do to work with the environment. So what Virginia Interfaith Power and Light does is they have that morality, that morality high ground that can be used to mobilize and to organize people of faith, regular everyday folks who can believe in faith and center their faith around the environment and caring for environment. So that's one of the things that I got to learn and to actually see on the ground is how can grassroots organizing happen with everyday people by connecting them through their faith and what they believe in as part of who they are. Okay, so with that, one of the biggest things that I worked on was the Atlantic Coast Pipeline and the Buckingham Compressor Station that is proposed in Buckingham County. So a little bit about Buckingham and the ACP. So ACP is a proposed 600-mile underground Atlantic Coast pipeline. It's an interstate natural gas transmission pipeline that goes from North Carolina all the way in Pennsylvania and even through Virginia. They proposed, they and Dominion Power proposes that this pipeline will create energy to Virginia and North Carolina. However, just by looking at all this map right here, I don't have a pointer. Do I have a pointer? Yeah, okay. So by looking at this map right here, you can already see that there's another pipeline already being constructed to go from the same city of Clarksburg to another area of that's Roanoke, so to Northern Virginia, called the Mountain Valley Pipeline. So right now, actually, more than just ACP, there's also another pipeline that's being built to come to Virginia, supposedly to also help Virginia with power and supplying energy. So now we have two pipelines that are being currently proposed on top of the already more than enough pipelines that already exist within our state and within across Virginia and North Carolina and Pennsylvania as well. So one of the biggest things that we worked on was within the community of Union Hill. Union Hill is in the blast zone of the proposed compressor station, and the proposed pipeline will split the community. So right here is the compressor station line, and Union Hill is right around this area, and that little cross sign is actually the Church of Union Hill, where we gathered to do most of our organizing and most of our grassroots activism work in Buckingham County. So one of the biggest important things about Buckingham is that there's a big hidden and erased history of Buckingham that that's not being talked about. So Buckingham is actually a historic district, and I'm glad that I went after Joanna, because Joanna talks about Sally Hemings and a really complicated way of turnout happened to be that Sally has a sister, well, Sally's mother's sister, so Betsy Hemings, is actually buried in Buckingham County after Jefferson sold her to his daughter, Maria. So now, actually, you can trace Sally, not Sally Hemings, but her niece's ancestry in Buckingham County. So that was something really cool that I didn't even put together until Joanna said something. So what we've tried to fight with our organizing efforts in Buckingham is try to fight the fact that Dominion is trying to erase the history of the unsurveyed slave burials in Buckingham. And there's this huge plantation called Variety Shade Plantation that has hundreds of unmarked slave burial, and Preservation Virginia actually announces that all slave burials in Virginia are the most endangered sites. However, Dominion still refuses to acknowledge this fact and still continues to push for the construction of this pipeline. But more importantly, I'm just going to skip this. Buckingham's battle has been justifiably compared to the ongoing battle against the Dakota pipeline, which is why my title is like Virginia's Standing Rock. A lot of people have called this fight as Virginia's Standing Rock, and the fact that a lot of commentators have noted that the Atlantic Coast Pipeline could be the East Coast Dakota's access pipeline, and that the opposition is building from people's concerned about environmental impacts, property values, landscape preservation, and dangerous eminent domain precedents. So eminent domain is where our federal government gives institutions like Dominion the power to say they can have somebody's land to if it's for the greater use of the public. So what Dominion is trying to do is take people's use eminent domain to force residents that will not move out of Buckingham to take their land so that they can continue with the construction of the pipeline. So that was also something that people had concerned with. That was also something that we tried to advocate for. But the good thing that I've learned over the summer is that the opposition to the pipeline is very strong. However, in all the media attention and all the news coverage, it's been told otherwise. I've learned that more than 75 environmental conservation and public advocacy groups are against this pipeline, and I can't say all, most of the residents in Buckingham would like to keep their land and would like to keep the air and quality the same. However, it's clear that with the construction of this massive compressor station, that would definitely be in danger. I worked heavily on getting Buckingham media coverage for the destruction that the compressor station would bring to the air and quality life of Buckingham. And what made VIPL interesting to work with was that they emphasized climate change and earth care by framing environmental challenges in moral terms. So as a person who is very skeptical of like using religion as a way of organizing, I was constantly learning of all the ways that faith can be used to mobilize everyday people, and that I learned that you mustn't win people's hearts, but give them hope, and then you center justice so that they can also relate to you in a way that is for justice and not focus on the differences among your own. So that was a big lesson that I learned, that the faith community has a moral and political power, and that they can leverage this to hold leaders accountable to prioritize climate change. And another thing, so right there you can see that this was one of the letters to the editor I worked on with another faith leader to get it published so that we can have more attention to the Buckingham compressor station and the water, the dangers that it can provide to the water quality that exists in Buckingham. And this is also another article that was published that we worked on to get attention to Buckingham and the compressor station. And then another thing that I really I'm interested in as a women and gender and sexuality minor is the intersection of race, class, and gender, and not just race and class by itself. So my focus was to see how women, especially women of color, are represented in the environmental justice movement, and how actively they are involved in the environmental justice movement. So this, I was able to gain an exploration of women of color's role in environmental justice movement. Just working with VIPL, I was working with women that are leading social and ecological justice and solutions worldwide. I've met feminists and women who were a believer in women's leadership that were leading this environmental justice movement, speaking out against the compressor station. Just my supervisor, my site supervisor, Kendall Crawford, who's an amazing woman who has dedicated almost all her life right after post-graduation to fight for environmental justice and fight for frontline environmental communities. But however, in the broader environmental discourse, from my readings and from just the coursework that I've done with Dr. Finley Brooke, I realized that women, especially women of color, our stories are not often told, and in fact, they are erased and forgotten. Nevertheless, in Virginia, I saw that women of color were leading the environmental social movements at the ground level and at the grassroots level, and I realized that recognition is an exercise in power, and we wanted to hold a celebration to amplify and recognize all the women who have been leaders in their communities, fighting for safety, equity, and justice in their communities. So what we did was we hosted and celebrated a community celebration called Celebration of Women Wisdom of Environmental Justice Movement. So we were able to create an accessible opportunity to, we were able to create an accessible opportunity to the information and the storytelling for the frontline creation defenders, activists, educators, and for all seeking to understand and demonstrate why and how women are paramount to the climate justice movement. And I was able to see and hear all the great women who were able to actually sacrifice most of their careers to fight for environmental justice because it affected their kids and affected their nieces and affected their, someone close to their home. So that was something that I also learned as well. So that's all I'd like to say. Thank you.